If you struggle with middle game planning, if you find it difficult to play end games, this video is 100% for you. I'll be covering everything I've used to move from an average chess player to now a FIDE master. So this video is a must watch, guys. Let's get into it. Now, my opponent with the white pieces played pawn to d4, and I responded with knight to f6. Now, don't focus too much on the opening, because the main purpose of this video is going to be again for the middle game and end game. So my opponent just responded with bishop to d2, and I played q to e7, simply adding protection to the bishop on b4. Now, why is this important? My opponent then played g3. So for persons who don't know, this is actually theory. But for the persons who do know, it is still going to be tricky to know what to do after the opening phases of any single opening that you choose. I simply castled, and white played bishop to g2. Now, this is going to be the first thing that you guys are going to write down for this video. Bishops are super important. If you're going to trade one off, put the pawns on the opposite color of your remaining bishop. So I said this in like another video where I was like, all right, bishops help to control weak squares. So if you have a light square bishop, you don't want your pawns to be on the same color. So I simply made a trade here on d2. He took back with the knight, and let's see, did I play d5 or d6? And there's a huge difference in both of these moves. I played this move pawn to d6, and it's starting to put the pawns on dark squares, and this is to complement the bishop on c8. Now that brings us to the second thing you guys need to know for the middle game. Look at all your pieces and ensure that every single one of them is doing work. So I played pawn to e4 or e5, sorry. My opponent captured, and then played pawn to e4. And already this is the area of the game where I could tell you guys that white literally suffered for the rest of the game. Now, you guys would have heard before that to take is a mistake. This is something that you guys again need to put. For this game in particular, whenever you're making exchanges, you need to look at whether it's benefiting you or it's benefiting your opponent. If you're going to take here, so let's look at this on a deeper level. What just happened is that the D file opened up. Is it going to benefit white or is it going to benefit black? The second thing that happened with this exchange is that the queen on e7 basically got more life in this game. It basically got more activity, while for white, not doing so much. This is how you would slowly get outplayed. And then his second move, pawn to e4. This is now creating damage as it's blocking out his bishop in the long run. I want you guys to take notes. In the middle game, you're supposed to be looking to make all your pieces do work. Now, as you're seeing for the bar, it's already 0.8 in black's favor, simply because of these minor advantages. You want to be like extremely careful in your games when you're doing this. My opponent was then faced with bishop to g4, and I'm getting my pieces involved. You guys know me already. I always look for moves in my opponent's half of the board as a candidate. The more pieces you get into that area of the board, it simply means that you're putting pressure on your opponent. Stop trying or practicing chicken chess, guys. Like, don't just curl up and put your pieces on random squares. Get them in this area of the board. Super important concept for middle games. we now have queen to b3. My opponent tries to break the pin. And another middle game tip that you guys need to start implementing: understanding your pawn structure. No, pawns will dictate whether your position is super good or super weak. Now, he just attacked my b7 pawn. If I pushed it to b6, I would have been creating a lot of light square holes around the king. Not around the king, around the queen side. Do not practice this. Pawn play must complement your pieces. So I played c6 instead and protected the b pawn this way. This literally creates less weaknesses. So it's like this is creating dark square holes, but your queen is covering it. If you put more squares around like here, where you can't get full coverage in the long run, it's going to come back to haunt you. And we're going to be seeing an example of this later on in this video, as what white did by overextending his structure. So I played c6, and now we have q to c3. Now this is simply just attacking the pawn, so we developed knight to d7, and now we have rook to e1. Now, another note that you guys need to take is, again, we're in the middle game. What are we supposed to be doing? Piece optimization. Any piece that is not doing work, give it work. So I'm like, my rook on f8, not so good. Rook on a8, not so good. How do I improve these pieces? And then I came up with the move rook to e8. Simply getting the rook to the e file, and I'm going to be getting this one to the d file if he gives me the chance. We now have knight to b3, and this is, it's not like really obvious why he played knight to b3, but I played this move pawn to b6. Now, if you take a bigger look at the portion, or a more deeper look, you would see that pawn to c4, or pawn to c5 is actually a little bit hard to deal with, and he could start swinging his pieces into that weakness I was telling you guys earlier. Remember, every pawn move creates weaknesses. It's gonna all come down to a matter if you can control those weaknesses or weak squares or not. So c5 followed by knight to d2, and this knight coming to d6 was very annoying. So I played this move pawn to b6, stopping any c5 thrust. And now he plays rook to c1, literally aiming at pushing this pawn again. And now I'm like, all right, I don't have enough time to get my rook to the d file. So I played this move pawn to a5. So remember, white is aiming at putting c5 here. So this move a5 is threatening a4. So if he goes c5, he's basically losing a pawn. So a4, and then I would have had that pawn on c5 captured with my knight, and that would have been like super game. So he played a4 himself, and remember, I'm like, this isn't this is maybe doing something, that's doing something. My bishop is here, my knight on d7 is in like a passive role. Bring it to an active square. Knight to c5 on the board. We have captures. So we have just fixed our queen, our bishop, our knight is putting pressure on the pawn. The only piece that is not playing is the rook on a8. So you want to be putting those in the game as quickly as possible. Now, back to what I was saying with middle game, you don't want to be pushing a lot of pawns, especially in positional chess. When you're defending, pawn pushing just creates too many weaknesses. In other words, the more pieces that come off the board, the more access black gets to those types of weaknesses, it's going to come back to haunt him in the future. Now, rook to d8 is a no-brainer. Like, if you have a piece not doing anything, swing it into the game. I cannot repeat this enough. And now we have rook to b1. And we're going to be discussing the reasons why he didn't go rook to d1. And it's going to be the same for reasons why he played rook to b1. The move pawn to b4 is trying pawn breaks, but at the same time, if he played rook to d1, would have the same move as we did in the game, maybe a little bit more advanced. One of them is the fact that rook takes here and the e pawn is hanging. That's one. The second one is the fact that this knight would have been pinned and I could basically like go into the same endgame that I did just now. So here, rook to b1, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and rook to d4. Now we're having what we call a good knight versus bad bishop. So for chess, I want you guys to look at it as active versus passive pieces. So if you have pieces on the board that is not really doing much, to me they basically don't exist. So we have a bishop, we have what we call the wrong color bishop. This bishop, if it was on a dark square, is much better because it's on the opposite color of the pawns. This, however, is being blocked out by his own pawn. The same e4 move that he played earlier, and the same thing I'm going to be doing as black. I'm going to be ensuring that I'm activating everything. So he went rook to e3. I went rook to d8, simply doubling up on the file. And this is also going to be showing you guys how this, translates to the end game as well, because this build up is going to show you how to actually play in end games as well. You're still keeping the activity. It's going to show you how to use your pawns, and most importantly, this piece, the king. The king is going to be one of the greatest assets for the end game, as you're going to see here in this game. We now have h5. So for the new viewers, to put this simply, when everything is doing work, everything is optimized, when everything is simply placed properly in the game, and you can't find a way to improve any further, you look for your breaks. That's how I came up with pawn to h5, trying to create weaknesses around another area of the board. Also, you could also look at this and be like, all right, my knight is good, how can I make it better? And just showing you, after h3, g6, this guy played g4. And even though my knight is putting pressure on that e4 pawn, we're going to realize again that the pawn pushing that our opponent is doing is creating a lot of weaknesses left behind. So I simply played this move, king to g7 and knight to h7. And where is this knight heading, guys? Remember, I like to cut the board in half to see my opponent's territory and see which one of my pieces can actually infiltrate into those squares. And then you would come up with the plan of this knight getting to f4. You don't have to see how you're crashing through. You don't have to calculate 55 moves ahead. Just focus on piece improvement and it will play itself. Tactics always benefits the side that is more active. So he goes rook to d1. I now went knight to g5. And after he captured, I captured with a pawn. Now, remember, we're still playing against this bishop on f3. So I need my absolute pieces to start blockading it as quickly as possible. I went knight to e6, aiming at knight to f4. And he went queen to d2. So now I used my queen to blockade that pawn, and now we're infiltrating again on those dark squares. Now we're seeing again the powerful theme of the good knight versus bad bishop. This bishop, even though it's still 3 versus 3 material on the board, it's super hard to defend this portion. As you're seeing, it's like what, -4 for black, because this bishop is basically not in the game. Knights outpower bishop in close games in terms of where the bishop has no activity, and the reverse happens when the game is completely open. When this bishop is full of life, then the bishop will start to outpower the knight. Now we have rook to h1. My opponent tries to keep the game active. Knight f4, king f1. Now let's see who is paying attention. I have my rook behind the pass pawn. I have my knight in my opponent's half of the board. I have my queen blocking this pawn comfortably. Everything looks optimally placed. What do we look for in scenarios like this? Pawn moves to literally improve your pieces, whether it's pawn breaks, pawn pushing, which creates areas for pieces to start infiltrating further. This is what you look for, and we could even safely call this the end game. The end game, you're going to be putting down that you need to start pushing your pass pawns down the board. Pass pawns are a huge asset when it comes down to gaining space. Plus, why would you not want like an extra queen on the board? So pawn to d3 on the board, and now my opponent tried to lock down things with bishop to d1. Now, for more advanced viewers, they will understand, but I'm going to still break it down for you guys. White is currently facing close to a zugzwang position. And what do I mean by this? It's a position where your opponent is running out of moves. Or already out of moves. If he moves his queen, then the pawn is going to start pushing further. He's running out of pawn moves as well, because all of them will eventually fall off the board. I am threatening queen check to get some more activity down that line. And this pawn is literally a burden more than an asset to the white side, because that bishop is literally boxed in. So bishop to d3, queen takes. It's like a case where white can't find the move. So bishop to d1, I took the pawn, and then he tried to close it down with pawn to f3. And we're officially, if it wasn't sure that it was the end game before, we could officially call this the end game. And what are we supposed to be doing in this area of the game? First thing, piece activity while maintaining. Alright, I'm going to even put it a little bit simpler for you guys. King activity while maintaining piece activity. So remember, you have limited pieces in the end game, so you can't afford to have one like completely misplaced. Same thing for this bishop here. That's White's biggest problem. He has pieces that are not doing anything. This is a quick ticket to losing the games. All right, let's go. We know how to rook to h2, rook to e8. So we had rook doing work before. We give it more work. Optimizing. It's the same thing for the middle game. Transition over to the end game. Piece optimization. The biggest thing that you guys are going to be taking away for the end game is this piece here, the king. Once the heavy pieces come off the board, utilize the king. This guy literally out of moves. Off for the queen trade. And now remember guys what I was telling you earlier, which comes back to you pushing a lot of pawns. It's going to leave a lot of squares behind, which gets weaker the more pieces come off. If there was a dark square bishop on the board, things would have been a little different. But by me closing this down and starting to walk my king up the board, this is literally how White is going to lose this game. King activity, piece activity. I don't have any time for any bad pieces. My knight actively placed is holding down these two pieces. You would want to solidify that down, and you simply get your king involved. White is also doing the same thing, which is super good. And we're going to be using what we call the principle of two weaknesses. Now, if you have one area of the board where you're trying to crash through and it's just not working, switch the area of attack to a second line. And then that's where you're basically stretching the defenses and your opponents will collapse. So currently I'm trying to break through on the e file, but if that was the only area of the board where I could attack, this would be very difficult to break through. What I did was switch the attack to a second area of the board, forcing my opponent to stretch his defenses. So the rook is trying to infiltrate here in terms of on the second rank, and my king is going to try to infiltrate on the second weakness on these squares. Principle of two weaknesses, guys. And if there wasn't a second weakness to exploit immediately, you would use your pawn breaks to create one. Simple stuff, guys. Just get this down. We now have king to g1, trying to stop the rook from coming to h2. And then we're back to our plan. Bringing the king in the game. The dark square weaknesses are going to help white collapse. So rook to c1 is again desperately fighting this king from getting in. But the king is the star of the endgame, guys. This is super important. My past coach made like a joke and he was like, you are up a king, use the king. The king is actually going to be a very powerful piece in the endgame. We now have rook to b1, king to d2, and alright. You know, I could have like quizzes, but I know you guys are following along, so I'm just gonna make this super quick. If you're trying to crash through and you're still not seeing it, either you look for your pawn breaks, in this case there's none, or you continue to optimize your pieces. This has already done its job on the H file. We brought it back to the E file. Two weaknesses. I'm like, all right, I can't break through here. I'm going for another weakness on the E file. We now had king to f2, king to c3, rook to here. He's just again trying to hold out, and no pawn push. I can't find a way how to crash through with my pieces. Use the pawns. Pawns are out, use the pieces. Just balance between the two and your chess will improve. Now, king to d3, he went back with his rook. Now, because my pawn is currently on d2 now, by me putting my pawns down the board, I got my rook to infiltrate. Do you see the tips that you guys need to start implementing? Rook went to a2. I brought my king. If my knight has already like done its job here, I'm looking to even bring it further. I'm like, all right, how can I squeeze this more into the white's position? Knight check. And after knight to b2, my opponent resigned, as there's literally no way to continue. Alright, so now you know about the principles of two weaknesses. Bishops can actually become worse than knights if they're on the same color square. How to actually activate your king in the endgame, and a lot more. How to actually play in all positions, both the middle game and the endgame, with piece activity and pawn breaks. Thanks again for watching, guys, and subscribe for more videos like this, and remember, leave a like if you can.